Mohamed, I have to start with the news of the day. With China, the impact on the equities markets, the impact on the commodities markets, what you think about the economic impact as well.
So I think the impact on the commodities market makes sense because it's pointing out to slower economic growth, and the commodity markets won't be impacted by the supply disruptions. On equities, I'm surprised it's not more differentiated when it comes to U.S. equities. I think the main story in the U.S. is the Fed, so Wednesday will matter, is the labor market, so Friday will matter. China, unless it gets to a geopolitical issue, I don't think it should matter as much as people seem to think it should matter for the U.S. market. So Europe, completely different, Asia, completely different.
And Mohamed, just in terms of the unknown with COVID, I mean, it's one thing to try and figure out how the Communist Party is going to react. It's another to try and figure out how COVID will react to a population that doesn't have the natural immunity the rest of the globe has, and that has not really made use of that time with some of the Western vaccines.
Yes, it's totally baffling. You know, we had the issue of lives versus livelihood, and we flip-flopped till the vaccines came along and allowed for a certain degree of herd immunity. China has been trying to do COVID zero policy, never got out of the lives versus livelihood dilemma, has flip-flopped. Now the population's patient has been tested. And as Joe rightly said, don't underestimate what happens once the genie's out of the bottle. But they could solve it. They could solve it by bringing in Western vaccine. Now, to be clear, you don't solve it immediately. It will take a good 6 months to get herd immunity. But the longer they wait, the more complicated. And if they go the other way, if they go through crackdowns, that's going to make things worse. So they can solve this, but they cannot solve it immediately.
Okay, let's talk through the implications of some of the companies doing business there. We've already spoken this morning about Apple. You've got Nike. You've got Tesla, some of the companies that are really reliant on the supply chain in China. How do they isolate themselves from this? How do they insulate themselves from this, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And what do you think about those stocks? You've got Apple shares down by 2% this morning.
Right. And that one I understand. VW is another one. Look, you cannot rewire supply chains overnight. Karl Bass was absolutely right. It takes a long time to rewire these supply chains. So what does it mean for those companies? It means supply uncertainty. What does it mean for us as a whole? It means the possibility that between what's happening in China, between the change in globalization as a whole, between reshoring, nearshoring, we may have an issue where inflation gets stuck at around 4%. That's how it really matters to us ultimately, is that the supply chain issues, the change in globalization, wages, all that means inflation will not get back to 2% quickly. That's what it means for us. But for the companies involved, it means it takes longer than they would like to rewire the supply chains.
Let's talk about what this means for the economy and what it means for the Fed. Is the Fed at this point of a pivot? We have thought that maybe even if they pivot, it's going to be higher rates for a lot longer. But does this change the equation? Does this change the picture?
It does not. I don't think it impacts the Fed in any way.
Why not? If you've got oil prices coming down and you think that that's the right move for the commodity?
Because remember the transition we've gone through. The first driver of inflation were oil prices and food prices. The second one was goods prices. The third one now is services and wages. So the Fed is focused on services and wages. That is what is going to determine how quickly they downshift. I do believe they're going to go 50 next. And they'll be very tempted to go 25 after that. But it's all going to come down to the service sector and wages in particular.